Now it's my pleasure to introduce and to moderate the next conversation. This will be a thought leadership spotlight, excuse me, about the 4 pillars, a psychology-based approach to developing leaders with strong connections to their teams. In the modern work landscape, many employees are stressed and disengaged, but effective leadership can boost team connection and performance. In this fireside chat, we'll be illuminating 4 pillars of leadership development based on the science of group cohesion. That includes exploring the self as a leader, laying the groundwork for a strong team culture, using group psychology to understand team dynamics, and learning to apply basic psychological tools to become the best leader possible. Our speaker for this conversation will be Bobbi Wegner, founder and CEO of Groups, a psychology-based platform designed to improve team connection and performance in the modern work landscape. Dr. Wegner, welcome.
Hi, Steve. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
My pleasure. So let's get started. Could you give us your view of the modern work landscape right now in terms of how employees are feeling and how they're performing and how those factors connect?
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite topics. So I'm a clinical psychologist by training and spend most of my days really working within organizations now. I teach org psych at Harvard, and so see this a lot from kind of a lot of leaders in the field too. And so what we're really noticing, and I'm sure everyone here is seeing it too, is there's high levels of disconnection, right? So disconnections is a very big amorphous topic, and it's, you would have to have your head in a hole to not sort of hear about it. It's all over LinkedIn. But the problem with disconnection, it's not only a business problem, there's really correlated with poor retention, poor performance, poor profitability, but also really health outcomes too. So poor well-being, depression, mental health outcomes. So we know social relationships really drive business outcomes, but also drives health outcomes too. And we're seeing this all over this place, kind of in the post-COVID work landscape.
Is it a lot about, do you attribute it all to like the hybrid work, people are there and they're missing connections here, or is it a little more of a modern problem that goes beyond that?
I think COVID really blew the lid on this for us. Like we were ramping up to this. Like what we always say sort of in class is that industry is really not caught up with human needs. The way we really structured these early organizations were based on a different time that really got embedded in how organizations are structured now, but we're kind of new people with new needs, and industry hasn't really caught up. So COVID's changed the landscape in this, but what we're really seeing is not only the hybrid and the virtual kind of landscape that's really creating more disconnection. It's also, one aspect is there's different generations entering the workforce too, with a different value set that has different needs. And it's not right or wrong. It's just a different kind of group of people that's sitting in the rooms that are doing great business for us. And we as leaders really have to figure out how to create an inclusive space for everybody, right? And so that's really driving some of this as well.
I suppose too that now that the 2-income family is kind of the norm these days by necessity, workers don't have much time to socialize with each other or have that happy hour or on the golf course or the pickleball court, wherever it might be. So yeah, it's probably multiple factors. So that's the reality. So what are some of the costs to employers if they don't respond?
Yeah. Well, we're already seeing it, thinking about just even quiet quitting, great resignation. People don't raise their hand when they say they're feeling disconnected or they don't feel kind of connected with the team. They just leave, right? And now in the post-COVID landscape, people have lots of options. People can go anywhere really, now that the world's virtual. And so the cost of not really addressing team dynamics, and what we mean by cohesion is really cohesion or connectedness is really the like strong working relationships in your work groups or in your teams, right? So we've all been on teams that we were like, wow, this is an awesome feeling. We're working really well. We're performing really well. I feel really great. We've all been on teams that were like, this just isn't clicking, or like you're sitting there spending 5 minutes typing an email because you're not sure how it's going to land. That's sort of a signal that there's a lack of cohesion, lack of trust. And so those are some of the kind of like signs and signs and symptoms that we're seeing.
Great point. I imagine too, we're going through a cycle now, maybe in the aftermath of the Great Resignation, some people are calling it the big stay. So a lot of people are staying put now, but not necessarily because they're loving it. You know, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily fulfilled or engaged. It means more of a concern maybe about economic factors and things like that. Are you seeing that?
So if you think about it, like as humans, we have a need for, we're kind of stuck between two poles. So we have a need for stability, and there's some, if you know, we all know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We have to have a
Yes.
paycheck, we have to feel sort of have some stability in life, and we need to make enough money to kind of support ourselves. But humans are purpose maximizers, right? We need to feel like we're learning, we need to feel like we're growing, need to feel, and Fasika, the prior speaker, was really talking about this, but people need to feel a purpose in their workplace, right? And this is the hardest thing for often leaders or management to figure out, like, how do you help people get that met within the workplace? So I think that's at play as well.
Now, we want to talk about leadership development in some detail in a moment, but and how that can be a solution, not only for the prospective leaders, but the people who work with them. But I just think the audience would appreciate beforehand hearing a bit of your own story, your pathway to founding your company, groups, and what you find compelling about connecting the lessons of psychology to the workplace.
Yeah, I feel super lucky. So the good news for us is that our work is very purpose driven. We are really helping people show up so they feel and function their best. We do that by bringing experts in group and organizational psychology to the primarily virtual but hybrid office on a sort of affordable basis. So if anyone's seen Billions and knows Wendy Rhodes, we're basically scaling her and then using AI and technology to provide ongoing insights, more on a granular level about like how the team's functioning and levels of cohesion through ongoing surveys and whatnot. So this really came about for me. So I had been in my own practice consultancy for about 13 years, really working with leaders and organizations and starting to just work with people really one-on-one and then at a team level. I do a fair amount of public speaking, and so I was getting invited to speak in organizations. It was a great side gig as a speaker because it's expensive and it's time limited. You kind of go and you do your thing. But from an organizational perspective, I was thinking like, this is not a way to make a long, like really a lasting impact, right? Like this is not how change is going to really occur in a real way over time. At the same time, I was teaching at Harvard in the organizational psychology program. So these are large classes of 200 people. I teach motivation, what drives human behavior in the management program, groups and culture, which is really about using group psychology to build strong working relationships on teams. And I teach applied coaching. So it's teaching people how to use clinical skills and coaching skills in the non-clinical spaces, so in organizations. And so we're seeing these people show up, these senior leaders from these organizations across the globe, really trying to solve for disconnection in the workplace, right? And I'm thinking like, they don't have the time nor the skill set to scale. They don't have to scale. This really has to be solved by bringing people together in small groups. They don't have the time or to really scale this across an organization. So they target senior leaders, which isn't really going to serve or make a dent in the problem. So we're like, okay, well, let's give it a test. Let's see what happens if we bring really people with masters and doctorates in psychology to do psychology-based coaching with work groups, which includes teams, but also could be new hires. It could be any way you're going to create really a subgroup within an organization and bring them to the organization at an affordable rate on an ongoing basis, and then basically function like a coaching arm along HR and L&D. So it really came from just seeing a huge need in the marketplace, testing the waters very early with some companies, and then getting in just straight out of the gate with some Fortune 10 companies and really much larger organizations because we're able to scale down. But lack of cohesion and disconnection is really a universal problem. So we are working with one organization that it's an 8-person accounting firm all the way up to a Fortune 10 company.
Well, yeah, I've been fascinated with this topic ever since I was a kid because we associate industrial and organizational psychology with Fortune 500 companies, but my father owned a billboard company, a sign company, and he used an industrial psychologist. And he was just figuring out the dynamics of why the sign painters don't get along with the welders, and things like that. So it can scale it more than
It's
people
the
might
best.
expect. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, again, we're working to Fasika's point, we're working with a multinational food service company.
Oh.
Really, we're working with actually managers within one franchise. So one franchise has 100 people. There's leaders who have different shifts, but they've never really had their own kind of team coaching or leadership training around team dynamics and understanding themselves as a leader. But because we're priced so affordably, we're able to serve people way like in all parts of the organization, which
Mhm.
feels super awesome for us. And then that's how we know like these people feel great coming and feeling like their company's investing in them. And that's
Mhm.
been really fun. But also working with small organizations, like everybody has this need because we're humans and these are human problems and they're the hardest to solve. And they're typically the most expensive to solve. So that's
Mhm.
really where all of this has come from.
Next question, just on definitions before we get into
Yeah.
detail on the leadership part, and that is, why is it important to understand rather than just understanding individuals in isolation, why
Yeah.
is it important to know how those people coming together in a team have create all these other kind of reactions and relationships?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's really, we don't think of ourselves this way, but we're hardwired for connection. We're social by nature. We're tribal by nature. At the end of the day, we're animals. We need each other. That's why safety and belonging. Sometimes people have this reaction like, oh gosh, what are you going to tell me how I'm doing something wrong? It's like, no, we're in a group and we need each other for survival. And so we're always constantly assessing our social cues, our social environments, like, am I safe? Do I belong? And so that's
Mhm.
why groups really, really matter. And when we're not sending very clear belonging cues, then people aren't going to kind of take risks, right? And you might think like, okay, why does that really matter? But innovation lives in risk taking, right? Think about the biggest, wildest ideas. Those don't get put on the table when there's not high levels of safety and belonging and trust. So we
Mhm.
really have to help teams and groups of people kind of get to a place where they feel connected to each other. There's trust there. They can take risks, and they kind of can just negotiate the social contract around what best looks like for them. This isn't a one size fits all thing. It's like helping teams figure out how to best solve their business goals and how to get there through creating a culture that feels good for everybody.
Mhm. Mhm. I think even people who aren't C-suite folks or psychologists really are fascinated with team dynamics, and that's why that show The Office was so popular, which I understand they're bringing it back, so we're looking
Oh
forward
yeah,
to that.
that's great. I love that
Um,
show too.
so now, you've built a framework at your company of the 4 pillars to
Yep.
organize your approach to developing leaders. And I'd like to just go through each one with you. And
Sure.
could we start with the self as leader? How do you show people how to evaluate their own values and strengths as a first step in the process?
Yeah. So a lot of leadership training is more of like this is how you do it type deal. But the thing
Mhm.
is we really focus on self-led leadership. So there's no best way to do this. There's some good best practices, but the best leaders are leading from their own values and communicating well and lining those up with the business needs, right? But how do you do that if you haven't actually assessed your own values? So we get sort of leaders in. We call them, if there's any people in the room who know what a growth group is. So we put leaders within one organization together and we help them sort of unpack who they are as a leader, starting from their values, starting to maybe common behaviors they do that might break cohesion or connection on team. What are common thoughts they have? How do you deal with difficult moments? It's all about kind of unpacking and getting feedback, not only from an organizational psychologist, but from the other leaders. So it's like people will then go learn these skills, go practice it sort of with their teams in the field, and then come back to this group in 3 or 4 weeks later and say, listen, I tried this thing. It felt kind
Mhm.
of weird. I'm not sure, but can I get feedback? So now we've created a community of leaders who are kind of learning and growing together.
And kind of making themselves visible and vulnerable, like these are
Yeah,
my strengths, but my weaknesses, and here are my
that's exactly
tendencies
it.
for problem solving and how I do it, and then seeing how
That,
that compares with others.
That's exactly it. And doing it so cohesion's built over time. And that's why we really have to keep price low to say, like, listen, you have to
Mhm.
sort of invest over time with this, because to get people to truly share some of these things, they're not going to do it day 1 or day 2. This is going to happen day 3, day 4, day 5. And so cohesion, even within the leadership group, is built over time, and that's where great learning and growth really happens.
So trust has to develop, and this leads to the next pillar, which is the frame. How do you lay the groundwork, so to speak, for a strong team culture that's rooted in clear goals and values? How do you establish that?
Yeah, so the frame, so within a lot of what we've talked about so far is really like the process or the people side of teams. That's not to say structure and content doesn't matter. So structure and unstructured both matter. There's so many parallels between parenting and leadership, right? If there are any parents in the room, you want to have clear views, you have clear values, you want to have clear structure around expectations and communication, and then you want to have a lot of freedom to kind of like explore and play and try new things. That's like kind of a good recipe across groups and relationships, whether it's at work or it's at home. The frame really helps leaders start to think about, like, what am I trying to do here? What am I bringing? What needs to happen? What's like the right size of the team? Thinking about all the structural pieces of building a strong team, and how that's going to kind of show up. So it's kind of more the structural side of team building.
And a bit like about the rules of engagement too, like how do we work well together and what's expected, and
Yeah, and like having them think
normative
about what do
things.
they need, who am I hiring, who's a great team member, who's not a great team member, what's like, we call it inclusion criteria, but it's really about
Right.
like what you're trying to
Yeah.
do. That's like you're mapping the structure of how you're setting up your team and your organization against the business goals, but also the culture goals, and then kind of having them map it out almost on like a culture blueprint. So now you have a working document that you can say, okay, I have a clear kind of mission, vision, values of my team that's going to help set everything I do from here on in.
Okay, that's the frame. Now, here's the part where it gets either complicated or fascinating, as I was referring to like The Office. It's like the work group dynamic. So what can the science tell emerging leaders about how to understand teams and help them work together? One issue might be competing interests, like one person on a team, that's their agenda is this, and somebody else has another agenda, and departments can clash that way in big companies too. I'll stop there and let you take over.
Yeah, sure. So like how wild is this work group dynamics kind of
Yeah.
thing? It's really fun. So the cool thing, so we have senior leaders, so we have in my classes we've had some very senior leaders, and they've said, like, I feel like I've learned how to see the matrix once you learn kind of like the principles of group psychology. They're like, I've been in the field for a million years, but I didn't understand the kind of the psychology bit of it, and that's really the differentiator. And so there's certain roles and dynamics that come up in groups. There's a leader, there's a disruptor, there's often a peacemaker. There's like these roles that emerge very frequently, and you can kind of starting to see it happen. And you can see it happening also like when you map it against stages of like the team development, kind of when and why people are doing what things. So we help leaders really start to like have words for what people are feeling, what they're feeling, and then help them understand kind of what to do or say, really with the focus on keeping the team together. So to build cohesion. So it's teaching really common roles, common dynamics. When you have like a difficult kind of team member, right? People can just think like we have a bad apple or a bad player. And it's like, no, if we assume that all behavior is generally sort of positive or expressing something, how can we actually use this to talk about it to help our team get stronger? And maybe this person isn't a fit, right? Maybe this person really is not a match, or maybe they're expressing stuff on the team that other people aren't expressing. So we're helping leaders instead of just throwing kind of being like, oh, this person's just not a match. It's like, wait, no, maybe they're actually expressing stuff on the team that needs to be addressed. We just got back from Texas with a number of group guides. So although we're primarily a virtual company, companies sometimes will say, hey, can you come out and do a few day workshop with us? So we did that. We're in Austin recently and working with an organization, and we're teaching them really psychology-based coaching for leaders. And they had said, like, if I just knew these skills a couple of years ago, we would have probably not gotten rid of a number of people that we had, because I would have had the conversation would have just been different, and there would have been a different curiosity and question asking that would allow them to kind of keep people that probably they sort of someone said they had regretted letting go.
Now here, it's interesting because you mentioned the kind of labels that people put on folks in a group,
Yeah.
like the disruptor, the provocateur, the peacemaker. So I imagine then just understanding that, then the next step for leadership is learning how to make the diversity of styles work together. Is that right? And not thwart them, but
Exactly.
try to, yeah.
Well, diversity is where innovation lives, right? If you have everybody, we had this very interesting situation recently where we had this one all virtual company, creative agency, pretty large. We had been working with their entire organization, most people focused, awesome organization, doing all the right things. They hired us to do like a one-day workshop. Really, they were going through a lot of changes, and they had laid some folks off for the first time ever. It was really kind of challenging, and so we came in really with how do you navigate uncertainty, and we started off with a personality assessment, which you might think like, why does that matter? But we really wanted people to understand how they personally navigate uncertainty and what's going to come up for them here, and then how can the company support. In doing this profile, we realized the majority of the company were all introverts. So now you have an introverted company that's all virtual. So engagement looks different, not right or wrong. It's just, all you see is people's behaviors on screens. So now we have to understand how people are showing up, what they need. It just gave us a lot of insight to be like, okay, how can the company work with their people? How can we work with their people? And not label them as anything's wrong. It's just understanding both how to create more diversity in the organization, but also how to work with the people that are already on your teams.
Now, this would be the fourth pillar, giving people tools. So what's an example of like based on psychology, a leadership tool that somebody might take with them and use to help diffuse whatever, situation they're dealing with?
So this is really where we teach kind of like, it's like a lot of the skills we actually learn is very early therapists or coaches, it's like how to ask good questions, things like this. So one thing we do in the one class I teach is motivational interviewing. It's really understanding people's motivations and how to know where they are and their readiness for change. And when you ask questions in a certain way to kind of evoke a certain change. And so with OARS is one tool that we use. It's asking open-ended questions, really empathizing, validating, making reflective statements, and summarizing the whole conversation. And so we teach leaders things like that. One takeaway would be is just to ask two questions. A lot of good leaders really want to solve. And we see this in groups where people start sharing. We invite people to share maybe what's not working or what they want to see different. And leaders often are then jump into solution mode. And we have to say, hold on, like slow the roll a little. This is coming from a place of greatness, goodness, but it's actually going to shut down the conversation. So your job is to really listen here at first, and then we're going to solve this together as a team. This isn't your problem to solve. And so it's like we help them ask two questions: what or how questions, what, how, why questions, and then maybe make a statement after that's not solution focused. So it's that kind of like very practical, nitty gritty tools we use in psychology that we're helping leaders apply with their teams.
That's a really great point. It's such a natural tendency of so many leaders and parents, for that matter, of just being fix it. It's, oh, we'll fix it for you, instead of showing people how they can do it or understanding better the situation. So we've got a couple minutes left. I'd love to hear what are some of the benefits for both individuals from this kind of leadership training, and then also the companies as both.
So you might be thinking like, what does this even look like, right? Like what is this? So it's people, we bring experts in group and organizational psychology to companies on an ongoing affordable basis. So our kind of biggest thing is like really 12 team meetings, and everybody gets 4 one-on-one coaching. And then we built a platform where we're surveying along the way. And then our organizational psychologists are taking de-identified notes that we can dump into our closed AI platform. And now we're generating insights back to the organization and to the leaders and to the teams to say, here's a little here's what we're seeing. What do you see? How can we help us all grow together with these? So that's really how it's structured, although we work with companies in all different ways, whether it's 6 groups or 3 groups. What we're really seeing is increased connection and cohesion. And we have broken this down into about 10 different variables that fall into those categories.
Wow.
The things we see after the first series with the highest rates of increase are feeling more connected, more likely to stay in 2 years, and feeling more valued. Those are like the 3 big things that we're seeing the biggest impact the soonest, although we're generally seeing everything trending upward, which feels just great for us.
Yeah, yeah.
And
No,
when we had companies have some where we're like, wait, this is going down. What is this? And it kind of puts us on our heels. We're like, this is actually just a snapshot of the team in time. Even when we say that, we can come back and say, listen, we noticed this decrease in connection right now. What's that about? And this happened with a company. A few senior leaders had left, and it was impacting how people were feeling. So now it gave us something to talk about to actually make it better.
Wow, well, great. Well, that sounds very inspiring. Now, in the 1 minute we have left, do you have a quick takeaway that you could offer for the audience members? Like, if you want to pursue this, what's a good way to start thinking about it? I mean, not necessarily just engaging with psychologists, but just what's a good starting point?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are a couple things that come to mind. One, it's like, how would you define yourself as a leader? What are your top 3 leadership values, and how are they showing up in your work? That's like a quick exercise you could do yourself. If you're really want to help your team deepen connection, cohesion, we often jump on a Zoom and we're like, okay, let's dive in or get started. We could go and have a whole conversation on why that's disruptive, but just starting with a highlight and the light of the week, it's just a great conversation. Give everyone 10 seconds to share, and it brings a human element into the team. And if you're curious about groups, we're doing a 3-part series for people who are curious. It's really hard to explain. So we're like, just try this and you can see for yourself. And there's a link to just a 3-part demo this summer if people are interested on your website.
Well, thank you. Well, great. Excellent. Great place to get started. Bobbi, thank you. That was fascinating. Really appreciate you being here.